Most New Yorkers have seen the same headline come and go 100 times. A violent man gets arrested, gets convicted, gets locked away, and the city moves on. But every once in a while, you get a case where the past loops back around, where a name the city thought it had buried shows up in police paperwork decades later, attached to something so brutal that people stop and ask the question nobody really wants to think about. How did someone with a known history of killing walk free, not once, but twice? The person at the center of this story was born Harvey Marcelin in 1938, an only child raised in Manhattan. Sources describe the childhood not as abusive at home, but marked by severe discipline and trauma at a Catholic school and later time spent in juvenile psychiatric facilities. As Marcelin grew older, the pattern that would define their life began to emerge: unstable relationships, explosive arguments, and violence that escalated far beyond anything the city was prepared for. The first killing happened in April 1963 in Harlem. According to police records, Marcelin got into an argument with their girlfriend, Jacqueline Bonds, inside her apartment on 8th Avenue. The fight grew heated, and Marcelin pulled a .38 caliber revolver, shooting Bonds once as she tried to flee toward the bedroom. Marcelin followed, shot her again, and by the time neighbors called police, she was dead on the floor. NYPD responded immediately, identified Marcelin, made the arrest, and recovered the weapon. There was no mystery, no manhunt, no years of evidence gathering. Detectives solved the case on day one, and Marcelin ended up charged and convicted of first-degree murder. They received a life sentence with parole eligibility, something common for New York at the time. For more than 20 years, Marcelin remained behind bars. Then, in the early 1980s, as sentencing laws shifted and parole boards emphasized rehabilitation, Marcelin began seeking release. During one hearing, a board member warned Marcelin that their behavior had been seriously assaultive to females, and Marcelin agreed, insisting they had changed. Over repeated hearings, the board slowly shifted its view. The original crime was old. Marcelin appeared calm and compliant, and in 1984, the parole board made its decision. Marcelin walked out of prison for the first time. 17 months later, New York learned the cost of that decision. In October 1985, park workers in Central Park found trash bags containing human remains. Detectives found more bags nearby, all containing pieces of 29-year-old Ana Laura Serrera Miranda, a woman who had been living with Marcelin. She had been stabbed to death during an argument, and Marcelin admitted to killing and dismembering her. NYPD arrested Marcelin again, and prosecutors secured a conviction for manslaughter while the earlier parole was revoked. From that point on, Marcelin was no longer just a convicted killer. They were a convicted killer twice over, with one of the crimes involving dismemberment in one of the most heavily policed places in the world. For decades afterward, Marcelin stayed in the state prison system. Parole boards repeatedly denied release, citing risk, the brutality of the crimes, and concerns about violence toward women. The file followed them from one facility to the next, a thick packet detailing 2 dead women, a history of rage, and a documented pattern of lethal violence. From the outside, the case looked closed forever. The justice system, for all its flaws, seemed to be doing its job. Then came 2019. By this point, Marcelin was in their early 80s, presenting as a transgender woman, now known as Marceline Harvey. The parole board reviewed the case again, and this time the landscape looked different. The person in front of them was elderly, frail, and polite. They had completed programs, maintained good conduct, and advocates offered support and housing plans if they were released. The board acknowledged Marcelin's past. Great danger to the community had appeared in earlier reports, but ultimately, after nearly half a century behind bars, they voted to grant release a second time, and Marcelin walked out of prison once again. After release, Marcelin lived in New York City supportive housing and building a small day-to-day routine of grocery trips, scooter rides, and conversations with neighbors. One of the people Marcelin became acquainted with was 68-year-old Susan Layden, who had previously lived in a Fort Greene women's shelter and later obtained her own apartment. How they met and the exact nature of their connection still remain partly unclear. But by early 2022, investigators say the two were in contact regularly. On March 3, 2022, a passerby in Crown Heights saw a discarded multicolored shopping bag left next to a building and called police because something about the shape looked wrong. Inside was a torso. The limbs and head were missing. Detectives recovered surveillance footage showing an elderly person in a motorized scooter moving that same shopping cart earlier. When they traced the cart back to a nearby apartment used by Marceline, they found more human remains, including a head, along with tools consistent with dismemberment. The victim was confirmed to be Susan Layden. The medical examiner later said she died of blunt force trauma. Police arrested Marceline at the scene, and as details spread, veteran detectives and reporters reacted with the same stunned disbelief. A person convicted of one killing in 1963 and another killing in 1985 had been released again, only to face murder charges for a third case. And not just any case, but another killing followed by dismemberment. City officials pointed out that this wasn't an NYPD failure. The parole board made both release decisions based on the laws, the guidelines, the age of the offender, and the administrative recommendations in front of them. Others argued that anyone with a known history of violence toward women, especially someone who had killed twice, should never have been given a second chance at freedom. Across the political spectrum, the case reignited debates about parole, aging offenders, public safety, and what risk really means. Meanwhile, neighbors in Crown Heights faced the horror of realizing the quiet, elderly person they exchanged greetings with was someone whose criminal record stretched back nearly 60 years. That the scooter rides and the plastic bags and the quiet demeanor hid a past that had already turned fatal twice. By late 2022, prosecutors had charged Marceline with second-degree murder and concealment of a human corpse in Layden's death. The case moved forward, and Marceline was remanded without bail. As of today, the prosecution is continuing, and the final trial outcome remains pending. But the larger question, the one that now shadows the case, is not just about one horrific killing. It's about how a person with this exact background got a second chance at freedom and then a third chance to do harm. If you strip away the headlines and look at the story's core, it becomes a disturbing loop. NYPD arrested them for killing in 1963. The system released them. NYPD arrested them again in 1985. The system released them again. And in 2022, NYPD arrested them a third time, now accused of killing yet another woman. So when people ask how a known killer walked free twice, the truth is less about detectives and more about a system that saw an aging body and assumed the violence inside it had aged too. But violence doesn't wrinkle, it doesn't slow, it doesn't disappear just because the person carrying it now rides a scooter. And in New York, the cost of getting that calculation wrong was paid by 3 women whose lives intersected with the same person decades apart. That's the story the city is left with. A pattern that should have ended in the 1960s, resurfacing in the 1980s, and then rising again in 2022. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous person in New York isn't the one the system locks up. It's the one the system lets back out.